Hello, everybody. Welcome yet again to Lunch and Lore. I'm Tormented by Gnomes. Joining me is NinjaManMat, co-creator of the world of Anacra. How are you this fine Thanksgiving morning?
I'm good.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, pay no attention. It doesn't matter.
Joe and I just spent the last 5 minutes literally trolling each other while we were on the slate ready to do
Yeah.
this thing.
Thank you. Thank you for being like, that's the most accurate way that we can put it. All right. So, what we've sort of been doing is been going through each of the four kingdoms of Anacra and then mixing it up with some relevant topics, and we've made our way all the way to the Sky Kingdom, aka the Overworld. The Sky Kingdom's origins were from you wanting to run a fairy tale game where there were castles and clouds and giants. That's literally like why it exists.
When we played Gloriana, which was a number of years ago, it was Joe's multi-year 9-person campaign, which was awesome, but we'll never do again. He pinned it to us as a grimdark fairy tale, and it ended up being anything but. It was amazing. It was the groundwork for Anacra. But yeah, the beanstalks and the fairy gardens and everything, that's where we started. And we ended up with flying dragon riders and a Lamokarthal and going into a moon that was made of blood and bones. And it got weird, but in the best of ways.
Yeah, the first adventure was grim fairy tale.
Yeah, for sure. No,
Like,
that's where it started.
literally
Absolutely.
the first adventure. But I digress. The Sky Kingdom actually existed before that. Had this whole, I was going to do a one shot for some people in Diego who just play. But literally, it just sprung from this idea of having this fairy tale style world. It was also inspired, I'll be fully honest, the video game Civilization 2 had a fantasy expansion pack, and there was a cloud like layer. There were different layers to the game, and one of the layers was a cloud layer. Go there, you had a huge advantage because nobody else could fly, but the resources sucked. But I always thought that it was super evocative. There were things like special resource tiles you could eye of the magic clouds and stuff like that, and I wanted to expand that into a full-fledged ecosystem.
Which you absolutely did. It was a blast to roll through there on our first adventure.
So let's talk a little bit about what it's like, what's up there. Then we can talk about how it sort of fits. This is a place that we're discussing recently. Had some more helped me shape it. So the Sky Kingdom. When you look up from the mortal world and you see the clouds, you're kind of seeing the underside of the Sky Kingdom. It's not one for one. Because if it was a literal exact, I'm going to go up there to the clouds, then nothing can live up there because clouds disappear all the time. You see a cloud and it doesn't just fly away, it vanishes, evaporates. And if that was the case, then all the giants who live there would fall down to the ground and die, which I'm not leaving it out a possibility that could occur. But what actually happens, if you, as a mortal on the mortal world, are capable of flying all the way up to the cloud layer, which in Anacra is about as far above the ground as it is in our world. Like it's several thousand feet up in the
Give
air.
or take. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to be capable of some serious flight to get all the way up. When you pass through it, though, leave the mortal world, enter the Sky Kingdom. So the Sky Kingdom is one of the places that has the most crossing point almost any kingdoms. Altitude is attitude, it's all that it takes. But that's relatively difficult if you don't have wings or very powerful flying magic. So most of the time, if you're going to get to the Sky Kingdom, mechanism. Giant
And I would
beanstalks.
say, not to cut you off too much, mate, I would say, much like if you are jumping into, let's just say, an ocean, more specifically the endless ocean, where you know that if you go deep enough and far enough, you're going to be going either into a well in the underworld where water just churns and spurns about and used to overflow and wipe away people's souls. You might end up in the realm of Leap On, but there are I feel like it's one of those things where if once you go high enough, you're going past actual atmosphere in the mortal realm, and you are maybe not in all parts, but in certain parts you almost kind of like crossing points. We talked a lot about crossing points in Anacra, and there definitely is a certain point where you're just going to cross into the Sky Kingdom.
Yeah. Also, chat, let me know if my audio issues get better. I know OBS has been rather nasty recently. Part of the problem is in OBS I've been peaking a lot, and so I meddled with things to try to avoid peaking, and then the noise gate was like, I don't detect anything, hergadurka, and it deleted me. All right. So, crossing points, You've got flights, which will get you there. I also kind of think, and let me know if you think I'm wrong, Matt. If you dig deep enough under the ground, are you ending up in the underworld no matter what? Like, I don't think
We
that.
haven't really covered that.
I feel I would argue maybe we just need to do an Underdark episode at some point. I would argue that the core of Anacra is the underworld. Like there is no separate physical mortal world core to Anacra. If you go deep enough, you will end up in the underworld. But it's sort of a brute force approach. Some caves have crossing points much closer to the surface where you can enter the underworld by going into this cave. And yeah, you have to go pretty far underground, but you know, it's that cave is sort of a shortcut. Whereas if you literally just get a giant oblivion drill and drill to the center of the earth, you will dig a hole into hell.
And I think you're right, mate. I feel like, and by not hell, the underworld, very different.
Yep.
But I agree with you. I feel like in Anacra, it's almost like there's this weird little space sandwich where like you have the bread on top and bottom, which is the overworld and the underworld, and then the mortal realm is that nice gooey whateverness you put inside of
Mm-hmm.
the life sandwich. Uh,
Yes.
and but the thing is, I think just saying you could fly far enough or you could dig
Mm-hmm.
deep enough is kind of one of those things we've talked about mortal understanding. Yes, it's like, oh, if you just dig a couple miles into the earth, eventually you'll hit the underworld. But it's kind of easier said than done. Like you said, it's
Mm-hmm.
more like you're going to find a cave, you're going to explore the Underdark, and from there you might find a crossing point, or yeah, it might go deep enough where you will eventually get there. It'll come out, and then you enter a cave in the mortal realm, you go through the Underdark, and you exit a cave in the underworld. That is totally on point. But if you
Mm-hmm.
were to try and just force your way and dig down, I actually talked about this with my players in a recent game. They were trying to use mold earth in order to kind of move some things around and go, okay, I'm going to fill up this hole. And I was explaining, well, yeah, even though you're grabbing very Minecraft style, a 5 by 5 foot cube of dirt, unlike Minecraft, that dirt doesn't just plump down in a giant cube. It disperses.
You can't hold 64 of those cubes in your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where yes, you could in theory grab a pickaxe and just dig straight down into the earth, but I don't know if anyone here in chat has ever tried to clear out anything. I recently had to go out and clear a bunch of earth outside of my yard to get ready to put a shed down, and just slamming a pickaxe into the ground, earth, soil, and a couple of rocks takes all day, and I got about 6 inches. It literally, even if you apply heroic feats to that, it would take you for literally forever. You would need to do like Joe said and build a mega drill. It would be an artifact that would dig you down into the dregs of the earth.
Over the course of
Uh,
like days.
yeah, exactly. So it would not be an easy feat by any
Mm-hmm.
regard. No one would just stumble into the underworld by digging in their backyard, you know?
I always like this idea that the world of Anacra, if you ever had hardcore technological improvements, which are not really part of the plan, it's not something that I'm ever going to explicitly close the door on, but it's not a part of the world that I'm interested in exploring, you know, or part of its history that I'm interested in exploring. But like, if the people of Anacra invented airplanes, I like the idea that these barriers between the four kingdoms, these mystical things, would suddenly change dramatically because
Yes.
suddenly they could literally fly into the Sky Kingdom. If they ever developed, you know, advanced oil drilling technology, you could literally accidentally dig your oil well down into Uzul's house, and then he'd start, you know, zool coming up through the ground.
Yeah.
I like the idea that the world, it's not that the world wouldn't hold up to modern technology, but that modern technology would like utterly change things, so the world has these weird physical metaphysical properties. I think that's fun for some reason.
It is. No, I agree. And it kind of makes me feel like Anakra, when it was split from the Dawn Realm, it wasn't actually split into four different worlds. It's all just the same world, but it has this, like we talked about, this like barrier, this net, this thing that keeps them apart.
Mm-hmm.
And by normal means, it absolutely feels impassable unless you find one of those little cracks or holes in the crossing points.
Mm-hmm.
However, technology changes the world. And like you said, it bridges the gap between the, oh, that's the endless ocean, and like, oh, that's just a really effed up magical ocean. It's not literally endless. It's just endless if you have a longboat, you know?
Right, it's like people looking up at the moon and being like, wow, that's a god, and then us being like, yeah, we've walked there, we put a little plastic flag there, except
Mm-hmm.
if in this world it would still be a god, but now you can get there with rockets. So
Yeah.
we digress. So main ways to get to the Sky Kingdom, there are creatures that can literally fly there. You can take a beanstalk. Fairy beanstalks are a thing. They're not super common, and they don't tend to last very long, but they are a thing. Uh, if you can get carried there by a tornado, Wizard of Oz style. That's actually one of the more common ways for it to happen. It's not a common thing that occurs. Like, it's not something that, oh, Those although maybe in one biome in some place, like in the middle of the US, they have tornadoes every year. There could be a part of Anacra where these tornadoes that carry you to the freaking Sky Kingdom are common.
And I feel like it would be less so, like you said, they'd be during that portion of the year, the tornadoes are common, and then out of 100 tornadoes, one of them will take you to the Sky Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So it is still a rare thing that happens, but it's not as rare as you want it to be.
Right, right.
You could straight up, much like somebody who ends up going in the wrong part of the woods, they fall asleep under the shade of a willow, and they wake up, and by the time they return back to town, it's 100 years later because they took a nap in the fairy realm.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of a thing.
Another way you can get there, if a mountain is tall enough to touch the clouds and you climb up it, you can step off the top of the mountain onto a cloud mass in the Sky Kingdom.
Yes. Also, we've taken the Bifrost there, which is also a pretty cool way to do it.
Yeah. Rainbows can take you there. Lightning strikes, enchanted lightning strikes can take you there. There's many different ways. Most of the time, it's a lot less likely a place that you're going to go. There are plenty of stories of people, commoners, accidentally walking into the forests on the wrong night and stumbling into the fairy world. How did Thoras get there? He climbed a mountain. I believe the story was he climbed a mountain during a terrible storm. Most of his tribe died, but he was carried by the storm. He was already pretty close, and the storm sort of picked him up and dropped him on top of the cloud mass, which is when he met the rain village of the Aurai and the Aarakocra. Yeah, I just completely removed my noise gate. Later on, I'll do testing with the noise gate to just tweak it so that you don't have to hear my awful grunts and throat clearing and such. But for now, I've just killed it to avoid audio loss. So we've talked a little bit about how to get there. Let's talk a little bit about what it's like. So we know that clouds, you can stand on the clouds. You have these fantastic landscapes. If you've ever been on a plane and you see these, huge pillars and rolling fields and stuff, oftentimes it looks like that, except you can walk on it. Walking on a cloud is usually a little bit squishy, almost like some very spongy snow, but it will support your weight. You can build structures on it. There are biomes up there. We had the rain village of Hraidur with its blue trees, and so that was a rain cloud, which is essentially a spring in the sky. It's got this wellspring of water that flows out from it, which makes it a good place to live. And the blue wood that grows there is super lightweight, kind of floaty, great for making gliders and stuff like that. The clouds in the Sky Kingdom are inherently part of it, just like the land masses and the oceans are part of the mortal world. I would say that for the most part, a lot of them are a combination of air and water, so you can derive moisture from them. They're also like a supernatural really thick air in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would say it's almost very similar to air elementals that you see. The Sky Kingdom, much like the rest of the sovereigns, I would say that the kingdoms themselves are just based in elemental energy. That's the whole point of Anacra, is it all stems from that. And much like fire elementals or water elementals or air elementals, they're not made of things that are actually solid. I mean, water, obviously, like you can freeze it into ice, but if you pour water out, it's not going to hold shape or form. When you get blasted by water, it's the force of it going towards you. It's not like it turns into an arm and can actually pick you up and stuff in real life. Whereas it does that in any fantasy setting. Same with air. You have this very hard, malleable, and even though you can pass through it, that air itself can choose to be corporal and can hold mass and shape and can hurt when it slams into you. Things like that. That's what the cloud stuff of Anacra is made up in the Sky Kingdom.
And that's what differentiates the clouds of the cloud masses, I tend to call them, from fog. Ground fog, sub-alpine level fog. Not all clouds are these giant cloud masses that you can build stuff on. Even when you can build stuff on, usually don't use super heavy materials. Only a very large cloud can sustain like stone on top of it. Most homes and dwellings are made out of the native flora, like the blue wood trees, for example, and some other. There's lots and lots of different biomes up there and lots of odd plants. They do tend to be these cooler colors, more on the blue, gray side of things. They tend to be light, not very dense at all. Where they grow, they tend to derive moisture directly from the clouds that they grow on. They are often, what's the word, like, what's that thing when you're growing stuff under a grow light that is absolutely definitely not weed?
Oh,
You know
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know the
yeah,
name.
there's a word for it. Op top poto opera. Damn it.
Are you? Do we need to call a bondulance? What's going on?
No, no,
Do you
no.
smell toast?
Hydroponics. Yeah,
There
they
you
tend to grow
go.
in this very hydroponic style. They often have magical properties associated with air, flight, lightning, that sort of thing. There are places where lightning grows in pools or wells. Those tend to be rare and they tend to be fought over since that's an energy source. Vindur will forge his lightning bolts from it, a la Zeus. One of the most famous. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I don't mean to cut you off, but I was just thinking about what you said about the materials in the Sky Kingdom and how they're maybe not weightless, but they are dramatically they still have either the same or similar strength, but they weigh far less. It would make a lot of sense if, like, for instance, the halls of Vinder, his great fortress, would
Mm-hmm.
likely be made out of things like we talked about the that ice, that like that
Mm-hmm.
metallic or that crystalline ice, or
Yes.
even mithril, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
a very light but powerful metal. Where if you ever had, there could either be legends of, like, a kingdom went up a beanstalk, built a castle, and after like a week it fell out of the sky because the
Mm-hmm.
stone and metals and things that were made there, even the wood that was from the mortal realm, was too heavy and it just crashed back onto the earth. And you have to make sure that you are taking proper precautions to build anything up there. You either need to make sure it's light or a particular kind of resource or metal or stonework, either coming from or near around the Sky Kingdom.
Terra Nimbus, the mighty fortress of Vindur, does have a lot of stone elements to it, but that's because Terra Nimbus is powered largely by the sheer bloody mindedness of the sovereign Vindur. It floats by his will.
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but in most cases, you're not going to see. And giants will often build castles out of actual stone, but that's because giants, cloud giants, for example, have a lot more power over their surroundings. A cloud giant in the clouds is going to be able to shape the the area around them and guide their cloud mass while they're standing on their cloud mass. They'll be able to steer it essentially. The village of Hrydur was in a cloud. That's another thing about the Sky Kingdom, is that it does not have a fixed geography. All the cloud masses are mobile. They fly around. They don't, zoom around at super high speeds, but they're so high up there that yeah, they you can actually travel pretty quickly by moving through the Sky Kingdom.
It's funny. After I saw, because I hadn't heard about the book series and until the movie
Mm-hmm.
came out, but when Mortal Engines came out, it reminded me a lot about a weird version of the Sky Kingdom where you have these like islands and these
Mm-hmm.
continents, these supercontinents and islands that are just floating around in the Sky Kingdom. And
Mm-hmm.
you talked about how Vinder is just slowly going forth one by one, subjugating all these islands, and only
Mm-hmm.
the small factions that are fighting against him are resisting. I almost kind of feel like you have this huge continent, supercontinent that Vinder is on, and keeps
Mm-hmm.
absorbing other clouds and other islands and other things. And then you have to like just either run away from him or hide from him or fight against him. And I had this
Mm-hmm.
very cool fantasy Mortal Engines thing.
You could totally run a campaign like that in the Sky Kingdom. Another thing to say is that the mystical layer between the mortal world and the Sky Kingdom. When you're in the Sky Kingdom, you can look down and see the mortal world, even if your cloud is not touching it, because there is like this altitude barrier at a certain height that is the
Yeah.
barrier between the two worlds. When your cloud dips low enough into the mortal world, that's when people can see it. Like if you just see a cloud sort of appear out of nowhere, sometimes in the Sky Kingdom, that cloud dipped, dive. It went down far enough that it's actually touching the mortal world. Most of this is automatic. There is some sort of meteorology going on, climatology going on in Anacra, where cloud patterns are determined by weather, evaporation, winds, so on and so forth. Because the sun doesn't work the way it does in our world, that meteorology doesn't resemble ours. It resembles ours like from a ground level, but if you ever actually start looking at the science that powers it, it's completely separate.
Well, yeah, because I would assume, based off of how our world is, you don't have a sun or moons that are light years away. Well, not
Yeah.
that the moon is light years away, but you know what I mean? Like they
Mm-hmm.
actually are close enough to where that was a point I wanted to get, but not right now. But I'm assuming that the planetary figures that revolve around Anakra
Mm-hmm.
have to be either in the same region or maybe a little bit closer or farther than the Sky Kingdom would be.
They're further. For the most part, they're all further. You can, like, if you look up from the Sky Kingdom, you can see the stars, you can see the moon, any other cosmic body, like the sun. They all pass above the Sky Kingdom, sort of either at the very top of the Sky Kingdom or in this weird in between layer, just between the Sky Kingdom and the firmament. But it's all much closer and brighter than if
Yes.
you are standing on the mortal world.
And smaller.
Yeah, and that's why the stars are so much more brilliant in the Sky Kingdom when you're looking up at them. What was the other point I was going to make? Climates. So all cloud masses in the Sky Kingdom move. Powerful enough entities can steer them either by summoning the winds or just by sheer will, which is typically a cloud giant or something like that. You mentioned mithril earlier. Our closest equivalent of mithril in Anacra is skysteel, and it is mined from large storm clouds, usually by the Grafa, the frost dwarves, the original like ancestor elemental dwarves of air, whose descendants are the wind dwarves and the snow dwarves. So you got a lot of snow dwarves in the Sky Kingdom. You have some Grafa in the Sky Kingdom, and the elemental dwarves. For each dwarven subtypes, they have their ancestor dwarves. We should do a dwarves episode at some point, Matt. We haven't done
Yes,
a dwarves episode.
absolutely.
Anyways, the Grafa are dwarves literally made of snow and ice. Like they're basically elementals. They're made of the stuff. And these gigantic pillar-shaped, they're like mountains. You ever see the huge thunderclouds that just rise up like pillars, huge columns? The Grafa live in these clouds and they mine them for clear gems and diamonds and all sorts of precious stones you cannot find in the mortal world. That's also where they get skysteel. Skysteel is light and it's imbued with elemental energy, so it makes a great conductor or focus for lightning magic, wind magic. The armor of the Knights of Terra Nimbus is made from skysteel. And the Knights of Terra Nimbus have all been anointed by Vindor, so they have some of his elemental power, which is why they can fly. But they need to be wearing their skysteel armor in order to do so. There's a resonance between that armor and the elemental aura they've been anointed with, because they aren't elementals, they're just mortals. They need that extra element. That's why they can just fly around. They usually wield skysteel swords. It's highly prized by mortals. Aaron Vol now has a skysteel sword of his own. So we covered that. We've also got the morass. We talked a little bit about the morass when we discussed the One Flesh. The morass is a permanent smog cloud. Anacra at this point does not have an industrial revolution. There are some places that have some industrialization or early proto-industrialization, like Sharon, especially in the grips of Sin when he was playing Civilization with that place. So the morass originated when a piece of the One Flesh passed through when the whole damn One Flesh passed through the Sky Kingdom on its way to the mortal world. It left behind this sort of ichor, this fumins that poisoned the cloud, turned it into smog, and now the morass is a swamp, and you've got versions of those blue trees with that really lightweight wood, except that they're infused with smoke and soot, and there's these puddles of poisonous clouds that grow there, and all sorts of nasty creatures and smoglins, these little smog goblins. Yes, the morass is the one fart. And yes, if you pickpocket them and you have a sneak skill of 100 and you remove the skysteel armor, they will fall to the ground. I think the higher echelons of knight would probably have a built-in feather fall, because they do have, it's partially them and partially the armor. So I think that they would safely feather fall to the ground, but they would definitely not be able to fly after you.
Well,
Just
and
go
good
ahead.
point of order as well. If you were to get your hands on some of that armor for the Terra Nimbus Knights, it's been anointed by vendor for them. It's not one of those things where you can now have flying armor because you do not meet the prerequisites. You could put the
Mm-hmm.
armor on, but it's nothing more than just really nice plate mail or half plate or whatever.
Now, if my players wanted to create armor of thunder resistance or something like that, and they were
That
using
would be
that,
an amazing reagent. Absolutely.
right. We don't have a hard and fast set of reagent rules, but generally speaking, if somebody has a thematically or cosmically appropriate item, you make it easier, you make it cheaper, you make it a good
Oh yeah,
vessel for that magic. So 100% it'd be
absolutely.
a good bit for that magic. There are a lot of other biomes in the Sky Kingdom. One of the things I like to emphasize about it is that a lot of giants live there. The fire giants used to live there, but after they were tricked into forging the sword that killed Anacra, Vindor kicked them out and threw them down to the world below, where they're at eternal war against the dwarves. They're both grieving for their mother Anacra, but they are estranged from each other. They're all grieving in their own ways, which has led to hundreds of years of bloody conflict. You don't see as many stone giants because stone giants like stone. You definitely see frost giants, though most frost giants prefer to live in like the tundra areas of Anacra, the frozen north and stuff like that. But they will live in snow clouds. And usually a giant will dominate its island. Either a giant or a court of giants will dominate one cloud mass. Cloud masses can range from literally like the Little Prince's planet, where you can fit a cottage on it and 20 feet in all directions, and then that's it, all the way up to massive, nearly continent. I wouldn't say any true continent sized,
No.
but like break Australia in half. And you could probably manage that for one of the bigger ones. And of course, the bigger the cloud mass, the more cultures, the more creatures you're going to have there. Because of the way that cloud masses work, not as unintuitive as this is, not all creatures native to the Sky Kingdom are capable of flight. Most giants are not capable of flight. So if the population of an island is largely not flying, though you'll always have some birds, right? There's tons of birds in the Sky Kingdom. You can have this very
Birds,
isolated.
insects, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Mhm. You can have populations that end up isolated if they don't encounter another cloud island for a long time. If you think of the Sky Kingdom as an archipelago, where instead of being able to craft a canoe and float between the islands, you just fall and die, you won't be too far off from what it's like. But I was going back to
You would have to wait until, instead of like how in our world you have land bridges where you'll have areas that are separated by great water that then
Mhm.
will recede, allow people to cross and then whatnot. You have a very similar thing, but in reverse, where in the Sky Kingdom you have to wait until these islands can merge and touch briefly.
Mhm.
You can cross, and then that's where you're at.
Yeah. Now, I would totally say that you could build a magical flying ship if you used the blue wood and some
Oh
spells.
yeah.
So that's
Oh,
totally like,
I totally think there's airships in the Sky Kingdom for
yeah,
sure.
100%. 100%. Like, I want to have frost giants in blue longboats with dragon helms just flying across to raid other islands. I want
Or
that.
storm giants. Storm giants would absolutely be doing things like that.
Yeah, well, a storm giant doesn't need a boat. They build a boat if they want to bring their friends with them. Otherwise, they just, say this cloud will now go this direction, and their eyes go zzz with lightning, and they just steer the whole thing. A storm giant, because they're so powerful, they're the kind of person who would take a cloud, by sheer will, shape it into a giant cloud boat and sail around in that.
Yeah.
Oh, they could do anything they wanted. You do have the cloud giants are perhaps the most famous inhabitants and the most populous in terms of giant population. Hill giants tend to dwell down below and get messed with by the fairies a lot. Hill giants have they're not as much in league with the other giants as much as they tend to be caught up with fae stuff because they're easily duped. Stone
Yeah.
giants dwell beneath the earth. Fire giants dwell beneath the earth and on top of the earth in the western continent. Frost giants you'll see some of, but mostly you got cloud giants. Almost all cloud giants live in the Sky Kingdom, where they have these big fancy castles. Like if you think of the archetypical Jack and the Beanstalk, you're dealing with a cloud giant's castle. And so the horn of a giant cloud boat would literally be a fog horn. It'd be made of fog. To answer your question, Chad. But yeah, so you've got like if you're thinking of a story where somebody stumbles upon a gigantic castle and there's a gigantic bird and there's a magic harp and a golden goose, that's big cloud giant energy. Cloud
Yeah.
giants
Absolutely.
are decadent. They like to wear, and a lot of this is taken from D&D lore, but they like to have these lavish, gigantic halls. They're famous for their gardens. You can make sky wine because cloud giants grow these grapes that are light blue, as big as pumpkins, and they're always cold. This icy chill, almost crystalline cold to them. They make this very dry, refreshing wine with it. There's like, and they have giant bees that they use to make mead, and apples the size of, I don't know,
Giant apples.
giant freaking apples. So cloud giants tend to have these magnificent gardens, and a lot of stories from the mortal world are about people sneaking in and to steal from their gardens.
Yes.
My mother is sick, and there's a magical plant in the Sky Kingdom that will save her. The most famous of which would be a golden bough, which we'll get to in a bit.
I also feel like I didn't get to touch on this earlier, but like you were saying, when the cities and the islands get close enough, you can actually start seeing the bottoms of them, and they see clouds in the sky. I feel like in that same vein, how you can have the denizens of the Sky Kingdom when they get close enough, they can look down below the mortal world beneath them. I feel like the same is true where you'll see not all the time. It's one of those very rare occurrence things, but and I think it would more so be either if it's just extremely close to the mortal
Mm-hmm.
world, or if you have a really opulent cloud giant that just wants to show off or whatever, you'll see little flashes where you look in the sky and like, hey, that kind of looks like a castle. And then you blink for a moment and it actually is like this huge, expansive castle with this
Hmm.
beautiful mountainscape. And you'll just look up and for a moment, you'll see this just vision of grandeur and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And that would be and that's why a lot of people thought about you usually either there'd be stories where people get carried away by tornadoes, like you said, or lightning strikes, and they were just left in a greasy pile of, oh, they died, but really they got transported there. And that's when people started trying to make their way to the Sky Kingdom, is trying to find these crossing points or these ways because they
Hmm.
saw this beautiful imagery and thought, hey, this is heaven. And it's like, well, no, it's not heaven, but it's close.
Yeah. A lot of other creatures that you'll see in the Sky Kingdom are large flying large flying beasts, hippogriffs, manticores,
Pegasus.
Pegasi especially. They have a special connection to the Sky Kingdom. They're technically a kind of celestial.
Yes.
I think that we haven't really worked on their history, but I'd be comfortable with them existing before the stars existed. Like, I know that the stars in our world are celestials, or the celestials are stars, but unicorns and Pegasi don't really fit into that, and I think they would have existed beforehand. They would be older than the stars. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
those are some other examples of entities and creatures that exist there. Let's talk a little bit about the mighty fortress of Terra Nimbus, unless there was another topic that you were going to bring up, Matt.
No, I think we just about covered it. I did want to confirm though, we talked a lot about, skysteel and the different materials that you can get there, but we haven't really talked about, aside from just mentioning the morass or these great pillars of clouds where they're mined, we haven't really talked about what the actual demesne of the Sky Kingdom is. Like, for instance, I have this idea and I've pitched it to my players before, where if you are able to, whatever means that you were able to get into the Sky Kingdom, when you look out before you, you mentioned the really fluffy, spongy clouds that you stand upon
Mm-hmm.
with little like wispy blades of grass that are basically made of wind. But what it would be the actual geography of it? I had always imagined that there were these really just larger than life, grand, beautiful, like we talked about, almost kind of like this purple-esque, blue-esque cloud colors that you see, where you'll have forests of rolling like reeds that, as the wind blows through the the trees and woods there, you don't really see, I would assume, a whole lot of just like super big growing fluffy things. Like, you would definitely have that, but they would all make noise and move and sound. You'd have giant,
Yeah,
larger than life mountains that are literally made of clouds, streams that flow, like things like that. Like, it looks just like almost like the other world, looks like the best verdant, most amazing forest you've ever seen. The Sky Kingdom, in that same essence, looks like if you took that, like if you took the actual immortal realm, but you made it 10 times bigger and
mm-hmm.
just this very cool beauty. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's larger. It's definitely larger than life. Everything's bigger in the Sky Kingdom. A lot of the life forms there don't look like things in our world. They look a lot more like weird algae of sorts, and they tend to be, there's a big emphasis on not always algae, but like, the sort of thing you'd expect to just grow on a cloud. It's not like clouds have a huge amount of nutrition in them, so they need to either be able to survive off very little, or they need to derive a completely alternate form of nutrition. They need to be able to transform elemental energy into nutrients, for example. So a lot of the Sky Kingdom, it's actually pretty hard to make a living in, especially if you're a terrestrial being. If you're a cloud being, then you're used to feeding off of, you know, the dew and other things like that. Creatures that are capable of surviving off of that tend to form the basis of the food chain in the Sky Kingdom. So absolutely everything's larger than life and everything looks alien in a beautiful and still somewhat recognizable way. I think the descriptions you were giving are really good, like transparent reeds, gigantic transparent reeds, trees. Yeah, they're trees, but they have these blue trunks and they grow really big and they're very light, and their leaves are these like weird shaped huge fans that sort of drift and they make this
Yes,
musical sound.
exactly.
It's a
I
lot
also like
of,
the idea that you touched on. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
and also the color scheme is, it's not 100%, but it tends to be very blue, right? It's cool. It tends to be all cool colors, and not a lot of the warmer colors. Not
I was
with
gonna
with
say very
exceptions, with exceptions, but
Yeah, I was gonna say very, for those who would know like Dragon Ball Z, very kind of like Namek. You don't have like those big, bright, sunny colors. It's a lot of just greens and blues and purples and things that kind of
mm-hmm.
blend together very well. I would say that there probably isn't a whole lot of huge contrast in the Sky Kingdom, and probably when you do get contrast would be at the dawn and dusk of it all, because of
Mm-hmm.
course the dawn, when it comes over, the first rays of light appear in the Sky Kingdom before they appear in the mortal realm. So, and then it just carries on because you figure like the Sky Kingdom from where it is, the sun would probably spend a lot more time being obvious in the Sky Kingdom. Like, what I mean is, you have more noons. Like, whereas in the mortal realm, there's this
Mhm.
arc to where you're getting this progress throughout the day.
It's a
Whereas
flatter, wider arc.
yes, so the night lasts longer and is darker,
Mhm.
the day lasts longer and is brighter. So all
Yes.
of the colors tend, instead of like showing the shift, they all kind of just blend together.
Mhm.
Um, what I was going to say, mate, and you touched on a very great point for this. I feel like you could still have a lot of predatory creatures within the Sky Kingdom, but
Mhm.
like you said, a lot of the base creatures, like you said, are these very almost they're less animals and more like magical life forms in a sense. Like it's just like
Mhm.
super bacteria or super
Yeah,
algae,
like
like
elemental
shambling,
bacteria, elemental, yeah, lichen
kind of like
sort of.
shambling mounds that are like
Mhm.
living like celestial plants that go
Mhm.
around. They absorb, like you said, they take the dew from from what collects. They have the sun that comes into them, and so you have a lot of these weird, you could call them prey animals that are very interesting and different. But then you'll have things like wyverns that are like, hey, we hunt
Mhm.
these things. Or you'll have puritans that are these flying, crazy looking deer like pegasi that are evil and they eat
Yeah,
things.
they eat the hearts. So yeah, the base of the food chain is very, very alien. But the further you get up the food chain, the more recognizable things are. So like the vegetation is very alien, the herbivores are very alien, but then like the things that eat those are okay, these look a little bit more like predators. And then you also get some cross-pollination between the two worlds. You've got things that fly and land up top, right? So you've got meat available for those creatures to eat. But I agree. The fundamentals are weird, and the less fundamental you get, the less weird it is.
I also think you get things like tressums, the flying cats,
Mm-hmm.
where they're these there. I think, like you said, not everything in the Sky Kingdom flies, but you have a lot of things that either it was born that way or it evolved in a way to where it was able to compensate and either get some kind of gliding mechanic, straight up flying, or probably has mad hops.
Mm-hmm. The other thing you tend to get that you can't underestimate, and we have a question from chat I'm going to get to in a moment, is the effects of the giants, because the cloud giants especially bring dirt with them because they like certain foods, right? There are certain luxuries that they enjoy. So they will deliberately get some earth and they'll mix it in with some sort of magical floating sky loam of some kind so it's not too heavy. Uh, but they'll get that stuff in there so that they can grow the stuff they like, so they can raise their giant goats and giant pigs, so they can eat a haunch of giant meats, and then you've like that creates its own sub ecosystem that goes from there. And
Oh yeah,
that
I mean you have tons of creatures from the Sky Kingdom, giants or otherwise, like Arakokra or even the
mhm,
Ori, the winged elves, that come down to the mortal realm, or even others. It's not like the crossing points only spring from
mhm.
the mortal world. You have crossing points in the Sky Kingdom that can probably not go to the underworld. That might be a stretch, but definitely the other world. I feel
Yeah,
like for the Sky Kingdom and the underworld, you kind of have to go through one of the others to get there,
they're kind of at
since they're
opposite
so
ends, and the other two are in the
exact.
middle. Hmm.
Whereas the overworld and the mortal realm touch just about everything.
Right, and the thing about the Sky Kingdom is like, where's the nearest crossing point to the mortal world? Down. Just
Down.
jump off. But
Just live.
I love the idea of Aarakocra or Aurai hunting parties that will like arrive in the mortal world to hunt goats or something in the mountains, right? Their cloud will fly by and they'll be like, we need to go get some food, and we're near the mortal world. There's food there, and they'll drop by to like harvest and then run away before anyone spots them. I think that's a really cool idea.
Also, mate, you just gave me an amazing idea. You know
Hmm.
how we have Anacra that is completely protected from the unknown, the blackness of of space.
Mostly protected, but yes.
Mostly protected, but I just mean you don't have a whole lot of meteorites and comets falling from the heavens.
Hmm.
What you do have, though, is you have giants trying to get down below. They will wrap themselves in the ores and cloud
Ha!
stuffs of their thing, and they will literally fall and crash down into the earth, leaving these meteorites or these space stones that are just coming from the Sky Kingdom. And that's how they get to and from, is they just literally go, okay, get in the time capsule. They jump down in and crash
So
down to earth.
are you saying Anacra has giant hell divers? We have
I think they
giant
have giant hell
ODST.
divers. That's where we get our space rocks and our meteorites. It's not literally from space, it's from the Sky Kingdom.
Oh,
And it's from giants and other beings that will literally ride these rocks down to the world below and then
one
wait for a tornado or a lightning strike to send them back up.
one. I still want space rocks, so occasionally things come in from beyond the outer
Yeah,
dark.
occasionally, of course. Yeah, every now and then.
Two, That's too wild. That's way too out there to not include.
Right? Oh, I mean, we have moons that literally will come in and then dive into the water and then come back out. We absolutely can have giants that ride space rocks down to the world
So,
so they can
like,
get there
cloud
safely.
giants and storm giants don't need to do that. They can just fly.
No.
But what they do is, like, let's say you have, let's say that you want more cattle, because a cloud giant is the sort of person who would be like, oh, there's a famous artist down on the ground below. I am going to bring that artist to my castle to paint a picture of me. And so they raid your whole village and steal your cattle to get this artist. Or they might just raid your village and steal your cattle because they need some cattle. So, like, they would drop ogres. They would stick some ogres in rocks and drop ogres on you. And the ogres would emerge from the rocks. And then, like, when the ogres were done with their mission, the cloud giant would send down a tornado that everyone would step into to go back up to beam me up, Scotty.
So picture this. It's 5 p.m. The sun's about to go down in the middle of winter in the Northern Kingdoms, and they see this meteor shower just, but it lands not super far away. It's like right outside their town. They go check it out, and they see these giant, really nice looking boulders, these blue and purple hued boulders that are on the ground with little cracks all over them. Like, whoa, that was insane. I wonder where that came from. And then literally cracks appear through them, and these ogres break out, and this guy runs away and talks about how ogres are born from giant space eggs that fall
And that's
from
where
the
everyone
sky.
thinks ogres come from. They think they're born from space eggs. That's amazing.
At least in that area of the Northern Kingdoms, you know what I mean?
That's amazing. I love it. I love it. Where the hell did that come from, Matt?
People will find, I don't know, man. It just is, you know, the brain of brains. You'll have people that will get those rocks, they'll carve them out and be like, look, it's a tiny ogre egg. I'll sell it to you for 10 gold. And you can raise your own baby ogre from, and people will have these rocks. Like, now here's the thing. Sometimes you have to really give them the right conditions or else they won't grow.
Grow into big, strong ogres. Oh, that's incredible. I love that.
Me too. That's happening.
Yeah,
I'm going to
that's
use
canon.
it next week.
So let it be written, so let it be done. Let's talk about Terra Nimbus. Let's talk about Vindor.
Yes, we have
So-
to. We have 15 minutes left, so we got to get rushing.
Yeah, I think that's fine. So Terra Nimbus is Vindor's personal stronghold. It's a flying stronghold. It's mobile. It is enormous. It is 3-dimensional. It's built on it's like this huge spindle-shaped cloud mass. It's almost like a flying cloud tower. It's got multiple terraces and gardens.
You're
carved out
talking
from
about his
it.
stronghold, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about his stronghold, not
Okay.
anything else. And he's got all sorts of stuff in there. And there's this thing we
Buttresses, big old buttresses.
buttresses on his spindle.
In between the towers, yeah.
Yeah. But kind of going back to something that chat brought up. First off, the Sky Kingdom does tend to be cold overall. The Sky Kingdom absolutely tends to be very cold. It's if you don't have you need to wear warm clothes when you go there or find shelter because that'll happen. Like rainwater. If you bathe in the well at the heart of Hraidor, you're going to get frostbite, hypothermia or something. But Terra Nimbus,
I feel like we're looking at, because it's so much closer to the actual sun orb that goes across the sky. I feel like during the days, even though it is so high, it probably has this very nice temperate. The temperature is nice, but the wind is so incredibly cold. So when the wind blows through, it has this incredible chill. But then at night is when you have to be very careful within the Sky Kingdom.
If you've ever been skiing on a sunny day where the
Yes,
sun is really
yes.
strong and you can feel its warmth, but the air itself is chilly cold, that's what it's like.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, you sort of alluded to this earlier, but the sunsets and the sunrises are beautiful. And there's actually, supposedly you can go to the place where like the sun rises. There's the easternmost and westernmost points. There's some supernatural topology going on that doesn't really follow the whole curvature of the earth thing. But we'll talk about that probably another day.
It's magic.
It's magic. So Terra Nimbus, like all cloud masses, it flies. And because it's directly under the will of Vindor, the sovereign of the skies, so real quick, the Sky Kingdom is not flat. Anacra is definitely an orb. But the Sky Kingdom doesn't have to just be the part that, sorry, I keep bumping the mic. Doesn't have to just be the part that wraps around it. It can sort of extend out into, I don't want to say space, but like, and there's also, there's this concept in Anacra that you can travel east of east. You can go if you're focused on an
Yep.
idea or a concept, sometimes that idea or concept will take you to places that should not be physically possible. You especially are going to encounter this kind of stuff in the other world and in Dream, which is another episode we'll do later.
And we
Uh,
even talked about it in the underworld. I feel like
mhm,
all of the realms in Anacra, aside from the mortal realm, like you said, if you thought is so important in those realms, and if you have enough will and strength of force within your brain of brains or your anyways, if you have the power or know the right stuff, you can go places that aren't actually there, and things that don't follow the normal rules will either appear or manifest. Is that what we're kind of
mhm.
getting at, right?
Yeah, like under normal circumstances, the world is spherical. At least the mortal world is spherical, and the Sky Kingdom is roughly spherical around it. The other world and the underworld do not conform to that, like at all. The in the underworld, if you go up far enough, you might actually get to the mortal world, but and if you go down, you're going to get closer to the well springs. But it's not a one to one. You, it's impossible to map those places out. They have a shifting topology.
And the underworld is kind of like a reverse orb. It's not like a globe. It's like if you were inside the globe. It's a really
Mm-hmm.
weird, chunky, cavernous place because it
Mm-hmm.
didn't used to look like that. And Prometheus terraformed it to being what it is now.
Mm-hmm. So Terra Nimbus, it's under the direct control of Vindor, Sovereign of the Skies. He's the most powerful entity. He literally is air itself. So it goes wherever he wants. And after Arakura was killed is when he began his conquest of the sky because he freaked out realizing that sovereigns could be discorporated. That's when he started conquering the crap out of everybody. His main concern is ensuring that he has control. And for him, control is about removing threats. He wants to be able to govern how people live their lives and what resources they have access to because he doesn't want them to develop any more sovereign killing weapons. He doesn't want them, like, it's not so much that he cares what their culture is like, he just does not want anyone to be a threat. And the Sky Kingdom used to, like, air is supposed to be the element of freedom. So the Sky Kingdom, you have all these little islands with their own cultures. You got the Arakokra and the winged elves and all these giants, and it's like, I am the giant and I am the king of this island, and my will is the only will that matters here, and everyone else do your own thing. This is my turf. And Vinder wanted to change all that because he didn't want anybody coming up scheming against the sovereigns and coming up with new weapons. His paranoia essentially drove him to be a tyrant. So he
You know,
turned.
the
Go
Sky
ahead.
Kingdom sounds more and more like Magical Deborah the more we talk about it.
In some ways, yeah, which is yet another episode. So he turned Terra Nimbus used to sort of be like his garden in a lot of ways. It was his garden. It looked very much like a, I always imagine Greek by way of Norse.
Yes,
Open,
that's a good
like
way of putting it.
Pantheon style amphitheaters, platforms and terraces, open to the sky, all over this floating island where you could just, vibe. And one of his most prized possessions is his garden, and his garden grows all sorts of things in it that cannot be found anywhere else. You've got variations on the giant sky apples and the huge ice grapes and all these different things, but you've also got supernatural plants of all sorts. It's where Alan O'Dale went to steal the golden bough. And the golden bough is the prized possession in his garden. It lies at the center of a lake that is mirror still. It's made of pure, unrefined rainwater. It's absolutely flat, and up until the thing exploded, it was guarded by an eagle that was always awake during the day and an owl that was always awake during the night. But after Arakura was slain, Vindor transformed the place into a fortress. So it still has a lot of that garden architecture, the theaters, the open amphitheaters, all that sort of stuff. But also, it's got a staircase that winds up to the very highest pinnacle and this huge tower with this mighty throne room and walls around it. And because it's sort of shaped like a spindle, near the bottom, it's heavily fortified because the bottom is designed. What'll happen is Vinder will park this thing with the bottom half down hanging in the mortal world. Because from there, he can rain lightning and send his rock ogres now,
It's
apparently.
it's the Death Star, but like with rock.
So Death Star with rock ogres.
They're
Yep.
stormtroopers, literal stormtroopers.
Mm-hmm. And part of the reason he does this, because his primary focus was on conquering the Sky
Ah.
Kingdom, and that's where most of his energy was for the time being. He knew that he could probably stop the Infernals from getting a foothold in the Sky Kingdom. At this point, the mortal world was being overrun, and there was too much danger down there for him to risk himself. So he just wanted to lock down the area where he was strongest to make sure he had total control. Which is why the Arai and the Aarakocra started rebelling against him, because he started trying to subjugate them, drag their islands around, send in his Knights of Terra Nimbus, abduct their children to raise them as Knights of Terra Nimbus. Like, take away their weapons, take away their magic, anything he could do to just make himself feel safe. And he was very effective at it too. I mean, he basically said all the giants who are the children of the sovereigns, hey, join up or shut up, either join my armies or leave. So almost all the independent giant kings and jarls and stuff had to swear allegiance to Vindur or dip or go on the run. And with that, he just started conquering the crap out of everybody. And when he rolls up, like, Vindur would literally roll up with Terra Nimbus, stand at the top of the tower, and yeet lightning bolts down at people. And that is very hard to survive. As his empire in the sky grew, it became harder for him to do that because he couldn't be everywhere at once. He's trying to conquer this sphere that encapsulates the entire globe, plus some weird stringly bits at the sides. So at first, he would just annihilate anybody who stood before him. But now there's sort of large swaths of territory under Vindur's control. There will be other, like, cloud islands, which are just fortresses manned by the Knights of Terra Nimbus that fly around, put like Star Destroyers, basically, unloading troops and enforcing the laws of Vindur. But then the further away you get, especially if you have these small, like Hryjur, the Rain Village, hides because the whole thing is built inside the cloud. It's really hard to see. And that's how they managed, and they had a lot of powerful magic, which is how they managed to go unconquered.
And it's like you said, where when he started out, he was able to use this mobile fortress to basically, like you said, go around Death Star status and just pop around, doling out justice and his will. But as he started absorbing and getting larger, he's not able to really show up and do as much of those very personal things. He'll send out agents to enforce his will, but for the most part, he's just holding on to his power in the Sky Kingdom. And you see far less of Vindur rolling up with his cloud cannon and just wrecking. I feel like in a lot of ways, whereas you had Sin that was trying to raise up civilizations and bring them to a point where they could be able to be a very good functioning and great place. And Vindur would stroll up and go, hey, you're looking a bit too civilized there.
I'm
and
bombing
would just
you back into the Stone Age.
And would smite. But now he owns so much territory and he doesn't want to, Vindur never ever wants to lose what he has. His whole thing is once he claims something, his pride won't allow it and he has to hold on to it. So now you see a lot less. It's maybe once in a generation. It's very rare that he'll show up and go all Vindur lightning blast. And now, especially as you move on throughout the time frame, the timeline of the world,
he becomes more and more held up in his...
He's more held up, and these places are more so able to not defend themselves, but they have things. I mean, they have what would you call bunkers and things that they've built in areas that are like really worried about this kind of a thing, especially in the Northern Kingdoms, where their structures will get messed up and destroyed, but they're not going to lose their populace or their belongings or their things, and they can bounce back from it really quick. Because I'm assuming the Vindur, once he unloads this, he can't just be running on doing this forever. It takes quite a lot for him to be able to manifest energy that can cross the boundary of worlds and do what he's doing. So it's not something he can just spam out all the time.
Actually, crossing the boundary of worlds isn't that big a deal because he literally just has Terra Nimbus like a plumb bob just dip down below. And he is a sovereign. He's strong enough to do this all day. The problem is he can't be everywhere at once. So, and he has like a lot of energy, and if he's just smiting peasant villages, that takes almost nothing from him. He's a sovereign.
No, yeah.
But if he goes up against a real challenge, that would deplete him more. Before we run out of time, I've mostly been talking about his war against the rest of the Sky Kingdom. You've been talking about his war against the mortal world. Let's just briefly touch on why that is. So he didn't care about the mortal world. He was like, you know what? The Infernals are down there. Maybe I can occasionally do a drive-by smiting on them. Just dip down, blow them the crap up. But really, he didn't want to expose himself to any unnecessary risk. An Infernal killed Anacra. He didn't want to mess with that. So he wasn't really into that. He was more into locking down his territory and making it so that the Infernals couldn't get a grip there.
Yeah.
What happened was, after the One Flesh, which he also tried to smite the crap out of, but it still made it through, and he blew a piece off of it, and now you got the morass, which made him even more paranoid, because now there's this another kind of infectious evil in his domain, so he became even more of an asshole. That's when his daughter Raelta said enough is enough and created the prophecy of the new day in order to generate new stars. She kindled the stars and created the process by which mortal champions can become new star gods. Every
And the
time,
Court of Stars.
and formed the Court of Stars, just did all this stuff, and Vinder's a control freak. And so, because Raelta created a formula, a prophecy, a formula by which new mortals could ascend to become star gods, champions of the heavens to protect the firmament, but their ascension would pass through his realm and diminish him every time that it happened. So he got super, super paranoid about that. So he started looking out for people trying to fulfill the prophecy. And anytime he saw a sign of that, that's when Vinder really started smiting mortals. He did a little bit of it during the Demonic Imperium, like if he thought that he could blast some Uzul worshipping ziggurat somewhere where he thought he could get away with it. But it was not very often. His attention to the mortals really came when the process for them to become stars was a problem for him. So
Well, because like
that's
you said, he was terrified of the Demonic Imperium because of what had happened. He didn't know the
mhm,
capabilities, where Uzul was and could be doing his thing. Just didn't want to expose himself to that.
mhm. But now the ascension of humans poses a bigger threat to him as far as humans and other mortals as far as he's concerned. So he started look, there's been a couple of civilizations that have been smoked the crap out because Vindor got word that somebody there was gonna become a new star god and he didn't know who, so he just killed them all. Let Ramius sort them out.
Yeah.
We are just about out of time. I'm going to take another question from chat. Has Vindor tried to do anything about the morass? Kind of. He's more about containing it than anything else. Like he'll patrol it, look for monsters and stuff. Um, but he's afraid of getting infected by it.
And I feel like with the morass, it's one of those things that, like you said, he's containing it because it keeps trying to spread, just like everything else with the one flesh. It tries to grow, it tries to move out. And so he is mostly containing it. And I feel like almost like if you considered it like an infected forest, for instance, and you have this
Mm-hmm.
really bad batch of trees where this moss and this blight is spreading. And you can try and burn down the whole wood, but the issue in the Sky Kingdom is how do you burn down the morass when the morass, much like the other hidden kingdoms or hidden landmass in the Sky Kingdom, it'll meld into the clouds and disappear, and it's no longer there for you to actually do anything with. So I feel like over the centuries that he's been dealing with it, whenever it shows up, it's probably really important. He sends people off after it, but it's elusive and it's dark and it is growing as fast as he's killing it.
And the other thing is, if the last time he threw a thunderbolt at the one flesh, a piece of it broke off and infected an entire cloud. If he just blew it the hell up with his thunderbolts, it could break into more pieces and it could spread even further. He'd rather have it be this one contamination that you burn the edges of it and you try to make sure it doesn't spread whenever you see it, but don't blow it up or you'll make it worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the fire giants might have had a much better handle on that if he hadn't exiled them for making the weapon
Uh-huh.
that killed Arakura. Vindor is largely motivated by fear. Yeah, by pride, but really by fear. He's the one who took it hardest when he learned that the sovereigns could be discorporated. That left an indelible mark on his psyche that has affected the lives of thousands of entities of the Sky Kingdom and the Mortal World ever since. Matt, do you have any closing comments? We're about 1 hour in to our topic on the Sky Kingdom.
I feel like we did a pretty good job covering everything. We might touch back on some things that we think of later and miss, or that we might have missed and think of later, rather. Uh, I think this has opened up that we definitely do want to speak at some points to. We already talked about Celestials and we already talked about the prophecy of the New Day. Uh, but I think that I definitely want us to do an episode on the Court of Stars. I think that's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a very nice tie-in to what we've started here. Not just
I
specific, generally about Celestials, but Rialta and her actual court, what she's in charge of in regards to the moons, in regards to Rialta is just as important as Ramius when it comes to certain affairs. He is the master of the below, and she's the master of the above. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. Absolutely. The
Here's
one other
how
thing
Cinder is, but like back and forth a bit.
the one other thing I would say is that if you're playing the new World of Warcraft expansion, one of the covenants is called the Bastion. You've got all these like blue angel people flying around. If you look at the terrain, the landscapes of the Bastion, that's a good. It's not quite what the Sky Kingdom looks like, but it's definitely sort of on brand. So if you're trying to imagine it, put a
A
little
good
bit of
springboard.
Yeah, put a little bit of that in there, and that'll get you on the right start. Other than that, thank you, chat, for joining us as always. If you're watching this in the future, thank you for joining us, listening to our ramblings. Lunch and Lore will return next week on Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific. And tomorrow, we've got the Coriander Society Adventures continuing at 4 o'clock. Be there. This has been Tormented by Gnomes and NinjaManMat. Thank you for watching.
Happy Thanksgiving, pilgrims.